Hello class, today's lesson is going to be part number 1 of chapter 3, lesson 2, the skeletal system. What we're going to cover today is everything skeletal and bone related, such as jobs and functions of your bones, types of joints, examples of those types of joints, kinds of bones in the body, connective tissues, what those connective tissues do, what they connect. So anything bone and skeletal related is what we're going to cover today. Let's start off with a hypothetical question. Let's think about, what if we had no skeletal system and no muscular system? What would it be like, and what would we look like? Well, if we didn't have a skeletal system and we didn't have a muscular system, we would lack support, we would lack structure, we wouldn't have any protection for internal organs, and we wouldn't have any movement whatsoever. We wouldn't have muscles to provide the power to move our body. We wouldn't have skeletal bones for the muscles to attach to move our body. So without this skeletal system, without this muscular system, we would be lacking all of these things right here. And the life that we know wouldn't exist. We as humans, we depend on our skeletal system and our muscular system to support the body, to protect the body, and to help us move. And without these, we would lack those simple daily functions. Now, our skeletal system is the framework of bones and other tissues to support our body. And our skeletal system is pretty impressive. It's pretty large. In our fully grown, developed body, we have 206 total bones. However, in our early stages of development, how many bones do you think we have? Well, I'll tell you that in those stages we have upwards of 350 bones. But they're not that hardened bone yet. At this stage, those bones are more in the form of soft, flexible cartilage. And as we continue to develop and we continue to grow, eventually that forms into the hardened bone that we have now. So my question for you is, what is this process called by which bone is renewed, repaired, or formed? I want you to research that answer and bring that answer to class. Our skeletal system is more than just bones. It provides a lot of functions and a lot of jobs for our body. I want you to check your notes on My Big Campus underneath your resources, and I want you to come up with a list of those jobs and functions of our bones and our skeletal system. When most people think of our skeletal system, they only think of the bones. But it's much more than that. Our skeletal system has a lot more to it than just the bones. The joints in our body are also part of our skeletal system. We have 6 different types of joints that we're going to discuss in this class. Now the first one, as you can see here on number 1, is when the end of one bone rotates inside of a ring formed by another bone. And this type of joint is a pivot joint. Okay, as you can see here, an example of that is the first 2 vertebrae in your neck. That allows your neck to go side to side and up and down. The second type of joint that we're going to discuss, is called a gliding or sliding joint. Now that occurs when one part of a bone glides or slides over another bone. As you can see, your example, this type of joint is the remaining vertebrae in your backbone. There's not a lot of movement with this type of joint. Just a small little glide or slide over the top of one another. The third type of joint, which provides the widest range of movement out of all our joints, is called a ball and socket joint. This occurs when the ball-shaped head of one bone moves inside the cup-shaped socket of another bone. Now, some good examples of a ball and socket joint are hip and shoulder. You can see we have a ball-shaped head of our humerus fits into the cup-shaped socket formed by our clavicle and our scapula. And over here we have the ball-shaped head of our femur fitting into the cup-shaped socket of our pelvis. And those are good examples of ball and socket joints. The fourth type of joint that we're going to talk about is called a saddle joint. And that type of joint is found at the base of your thumb, right here. It allows movement in 2 directions. The fifth type of joint that we are going to talk about is a little bit different from the other joints in the fact that there's no movement. It's called a fixed or immovable joint. Examples of this are found between the bones of your skull. Now you'll notice with this diagram that I have here, we have all different kinds of bones in our skull. We have a frontal bone in the front. We have a zygomatic bone underneath our eye. We have our mandible, which is our jaw, a nasal bone. We have a temporal bone on the side. We have an occipital bone in the back. Now, any place where these bones come together, they are still considered joints, even though there's no movement. The sixth and final type of joint that we're going to talk about is called a hinge joint. This type of joint is very similar to a door hinge, in which there's movement in only one direction, basically opening and closing of the joint. So two good examples of this are the knee and the elbow, where basically that joint just opens and closes and there's no rotation. Okay, and those are examples of hinge joints. Another part of our skeletal system that is often overlooked is the connective tissues that are found within it. We have three types of connective tissues that we're going to discuss. The first type of connective tissue is called a ligament. Now this is the type of connective tissue that, as you can see, connects bone to bone. It basically holds your bones together at the joint. This diagram right here is an example of your knee joint. In this diagram you can see some various different ligaments. You see your patellar ligament here. You see your LCL, or your lateral collateral ligament here, your MCL here. Basically what these ligaments do, all right, is they hold these bones together where they are at the joint. Okay, it gives it some stability to hold those bones together. The second type of connective tissue that we're going to talk about is called a tendon. This type of connective tissue joins muscle to bone. And the most common example of a tendon that we know is called the Achilles tendon. And the Achilles tendon connects your calf muscle to your heel bone. And we're going to do some other demonstrations in class of showing some other various tendons in our hands and our wrists and things like that. The third type of connective tissue is cartilage. Now this is the soft, flexible material that cushions the end of bones. It supports soft tissue areas like the tip of your nose, your ears, in between your ribs. It allows your joints to move freely and easily. So it's a soft, flexible, bending material. And we're going to do a couple demonstrations in class where we bend our nose back and forth and our ears back and forth to show you how soft and flexible this cartilage can be. If you remember back to the beginning of the lesson, we said that we have 206 bones in our body. Now, those 206 bones are broken down into 4 different categories based on their shape and size. The first type of bone that we have are called long bones. Now these bones are shaped like tubes. They're long, slightly curved, and usually they have a knobby end to them. Some good examples of these are your femur and your humerus. Okay. As you can see in the picture here, these bones are long and tubular. They have a slight curve to them, and they have a knobby end. Inside of them, they have compact bones, spongy bones, things like that. Red and white blood cells are produced in there. So they have more functions than just being bones. The second type of bone that we have is called a short bone. Now these bones are very small. They're about as long as they are wide, so they don't have much size to them. And some good examples of those are the bones found in your wrists and your ankles. Now we call those your carpals and your tarsals. Because as you can see, as we talked about in class, each one of these bones in here actually has their own individual name. And each one of those bones are examples of short bones. The third type of bone that we're going to discuss are called flat bones. Now these are called flat bones very simply because they usually have a thin or flattened shape. They might have a slight curve to them, but they're usually thin and flattened. Good examples of flat bones are the bones found in your skull and also your shoulder blade, which is called your scapula. Now they do have a slight curve to them, but in general, they are relatively flat. And the fourth type of bone called an irregular bone. Now, I have no idea why they decided to call these irregular bones. Basically, what they do is they have a variety of shapes. They don't fit into any of the other previous categories, so they just classify them as irregular bones. Now, good examples of an irregular bone are your vertebrae. Okay, they're not long, they're not short, they're not flat. Okay, so we'll call them irregular bones. Now, even though our skeletal system is pretty amazing, we have a lot of bones, we have 206 bones, so it's pretty vast, it's pretty durable. It's not without its own injuries and diseases. If you look on the left-hand side over here, I have 5 different types of injuries or diseases that occur to our skeletal system. What I want you to do is I want you to research these injuries and diseases and come up with the names of them and bring these answers to class. Okay, so injury number 1 is an injury that occurs when there's a break or a crack in the bone. And there's many types of these. Injury number 2 occurs when ligaments at a joint are severely stretched or torn and the bone is actually removed from its position at the joint. Injury number 3 occurs when ligaments at a joint are stretched and twisted, but the bone remains in place. Injury number 4 is a condition that occurs when an individual's bones become weak and brittle. Often occurs in older age and the elderly. And number 5 is a condition in which there's pain and inflammation of the joints, often caused by wear and tear in those joints, whether it's the weight-bearing joints of your knees and your hips or in your fingers. What I want you to do is research these and come up with the names of these injuries and bring them to class for our class discussion. Okay, if you have any questions on any of this, any of the answers, please make sure you come see me and we'll discuss this when you come to class next time.